Hi, this is Jeff Gorey, the Principal Investigator for the Transformer Toolkit project. I'm back again today with another video tutorial, so let's dive right into it. Today we're going to be discussing the Transformer Purchase Forecasting Guide, the Assumptions tab, right here. And so as we step through this, I'm going to go ahead and do an Alt WN for a new window. So I'm going to make adjustments to these variables and show you how those adjustments show up on the summary tab, because this is all real-time simulation. So the first thing is the current year, so year 0, the first year that we're going to simulate. As I make a change to this, let's make it 2030. You'll see the year changes. Some different things to change as well. The reason you're getting failure number changes is because part of the random number generation that happens, it takes into account the year, and so as you change this, it's going to change your random generated probabilities, but not a big deal. The first one here is the assumed peak demand per customer at first year. So our default value is 7. Whatever you think a good assumed peak demand is for a home, you can enter that. But basically, if we trace the dependence here, data, let's see, how do we do that? Trace dependence, and we click this, or we click this. You'll notice that what's happening here is this is being used by column G in the Inputs tab. Column G is basically determining the number of homes served on a transformer, and so it's a formula that's saying, like, if this is 7 kVA per home and this transformer is sized as 10, it's going to say it's only serving 1 home. If we make this 4, it's then supposed to say 2, which it does, so that's good. We'll make that 7 there. And then again, if it the way that it's actually calculating its peak load, you'll notice here it says the base peak load for the first year is not 7, it's 8. That is being calculated based on the assumed transformer reserve capacity. So you have basically 2 ways to control that. Let's get that dependent out of there, remove dependent. So that is one part as well. The reason the home served is important is because later on the number of vehicles per home is also an assumption. And so as we're modeling the future EV loads, that number becomes important as well. So moving on to the second variable, assume transformer reserve capacity at the first year. So this is saying how much space is left on your transformer after your base peak load. So for transformer that was sized as 10 kVA over here, let's make this a little bigger so we can see. 10 kVA over here. Actually, give me one sec. Alt WG, optimize that. So a transformer that's 10 kVA, if we say its assumed reserve capacity is 20%, it should be saying that the base peak load is 8 kVA. So that would mean there's 2 kVA left, or 20% reserve capacity in that transformer. You can make this 30, which should make that 7. You could make it 50. I highly doubt 50 is the number there. But whatever is common for your system, let's say your standard for sizing was developed 40 years ago and you haven't changed it, and you were sizing in a world where people didn't have a million computers and a bunch more energy users in the house. You may want to make this a smaller number, 5%. And you'll see you're going to have more failures if your existing capacity in the beginning is a lower number. You're going to have more peak served. So that's just another thing to consider. Let's see here. So moving on, the annual peak demand escalation rate. So this is a variable to account for assuming that people are just using more energy year after year, getting more devices, doing more cooling, whatever it may be. The general trend has been people using more energy. And so you can make this 1%, you can make it 5%, whatever it needs to do. The reason you're seeing a cap out there is there's a ceiling variable later on here. But, it's pretty interesting, powerful variable there. I keep it at 1%. I think that's pretty good. I think you could even do 0.5%. And then there's another number here, which is saying, like, let's say we make this 5%. There's a ceiling for the annual peak demand escalation rate. So I don't think we're going to increase our usage 5% year over year until everyone's using, a megawatt in their home 100 years from now, or whatever it would be. So you can cap that too. So the way that it works is it's a percentage of, so it takes this what would be like your base peak load, and it multiplies it by 1 plus this percentage. So if it was like 10%, it would be, we're only going to increase we're only going to have an annual peak demand escalation of up to 1.1 times the original. So, you can keep this at whatever you like. I think as you're adjusting these variables, it's always good to keep an eye on what the graphs do over here and make sure that it makes sense. As we know, if you torture the data enough, you can make it to say whatever you want to. So approach your assumptions with a clear head and not necessarily trying to get to a certain result. So that's that one. Load served replacement threshold. This is an interesting one too. So it's basically saying, as I adjust it, we're going to have more failures. But let me take a step back. It's saying if my peak load exceeds 150% of my rated transformer capacity, which again would be the size here, kVA. So if my load eventually gets up to 150, for this one, it would be 15 kVA, then that is the point I'm saying that fuses are going to start blowing in this transformer. I'm either going to have to replace the fuse every week and have a very angry customer, or I'm going to have to replace the transformer with one size up. And so this is up to you to define your threshold. What we found from the project committee was that different municipalities had different specs for their fuses at different interval of transformer size. And so we left it up to you. I have it as 175 in here. It's recommended as 175, but it's really, whichever you prefer. So moving right along. So you'll notice here there are these sections like load-related failure, transformer replacement, and then age-related failure. With load-related failure, we're basically talking about load due to the base load increasing or load increasing due to people buying more EVs, what this whole tool is about, right? So back to the summary tab there. We're going to move on to this EV section. So the assumed average vehicles per home, this is a number because we don't want to say, we know exactly how many vehicles are at every home and how many there will be forever into the future. You're kind of just making an assumption here. So I have this number as 2. If I make it 1, we should see, depending on the other variables, we should see less failures. Yeah, we did. So these bars got bigger, but you got to check the y-axis here. So it goes from, 5 and 6 to, 5 and 4. The magnitude of the change on your system will be based upon how many transformers you're modeling on input and then your other assumptions here, as you'll see. But let's put that back at 2. Just assuming, on average, 2 vehicles in the home. And then you'll want to do current EV market share. As you get this information, I would advise you to be careful about what number you use here. You don't want to put in the percentage of new vehicles sold, whatever those are of EVs. You don't want to do that because not everyone is driving a new vehicle every year. You need to think about market share. So how many EVs are actually on the road in your state, in your community, in your municipality? Some people, depending on what state you're in and if you have a good relationship with the folks who handle vehicle registrations, I can't think of the name of the department right now, you may be able to get that data directly from them and have a really good answer. But you'll notice here there's a comment on this cell. The thing that I've been using is this, to find your state's percentage, visit the AFDC. There's this URL, and we'll go ahead and enter it in here. Hello IAMU webpage. Let's enter this in here. So basically, this is the Alternative Fuels Data Center. This is some really great government data. Super grateful to this agency for doing what they do. This data feeds the lookup tab. for this vehicle spec. But another thing it has is market share of EVs, on a state-by-state basis. And so it's updated to 2023. In Iowa, we're maybe a little bit different than some place like California or Washington. Our market share is 0.3% of all vehicles. And so if I were to make this 0.3, and let's Control-Z that real quick and get this comment out of here. So if I were to make this 0.3, which in Excel, when you're entering in something formatted as a percentage, you have to do 0.003 to get it as 0.3%. You'll notice I should have less failures, which I do. That's what happens there, because this is saying there are less EVs in the market share, and so I have, as an average across my entire service territory, I'm going to have less higher loads because of there being less electric vehicles out there in my community. So that's what that's about. The default value is listed as 1.4 because I averaged all of those numbers, or I guess in 2024 it was 1.4% on average. You know your state, so enter in the appropriate number there. And don't do new vehicles sold, do market share of all vehicles. Another one here is the EV market share annual escalation rate. If we go to our inputs tab and we see as we step through the years here, our EV market share is basically, it's the year prior times this EV adoption escalation. This is default hidden in this tab, but all the variable names, if you're into the back end stuff, are listed here as a hidden column. But let's get that out of the way. So basically it's just, it's stepping through each year by year, and it's increasing the EV market share by this percentage that you specify. So this number, 1.41, is 1.4 times, 1.01, or times, increasing it by 1%. What's cool about this part is that every year, the number of EVs that you have, it is being rolled via the random numbers and probabilities to match, so that you have a probabilistic modeling of EV increases, EV adoption rate increase. And so one of the things on the summary tab you'll see is that, you have the actual EV market share versus the the modeled market share. When you have higher numbers, these get closer together, but it's kind of a weird quirk of the modeling. When you're so low, it kind of steps like that. But it'll just tell you, how your market share is increasing based on the probabilities. When you have higher probabilities, or let's say this is like 10%, it's going to increase more in line, like the actual versus the prescribed percentage. One thing you'll notice here, when I made that a big, saying this is pretty unrealistic, but that my EV market share is increasing by 50% year over year, we've hit a cap, and it's this 50% number. That 50% is this next one right here, this maximum EV market share. So I don't have a crystal ball. I can't predict the future. I don't know if we will all be driving EVs in 50 years. Personally, I think it's likely that we will be, but who knows? And so maybe you want to say, not everyone's going to get to electric vehicles. So you can specify a cap here. I can make it 70%, and then it actually caps out further off the graph here. I can make it 20%. You're going to see, make sure you watch where your y-axis changes, but you're going to see it caps out at 20. So I've got it in here, default is 50. This is more of a philosophical question, and so the default isn't necessarily the gospel, but it's in there for you. So one thing to consider. So moving on, the typical max EV charging rate on peak. I have this in here as 12.8. I may end up making this lower because I think that seems pretty high. But basically, this is just saying, if you're assuming that everyone has level 2 chargers and they're charging their EVs while they're on the monthly coincident peak for everyone on this transformer, and you think that they average 10 kVA when they're charging on that peak, that's what I would put there. One thing that you may want to consider is going to the lookup tab and just, let's say, for all 2025 vehicles, so I'm filtering this lookup. I'm going to zoom to EV table. I'm going to filter that, and then the vehicle type, I'm going to do basically everything that isn't a fleet vehicle. So let's do no delivery, no last mile. Actually, let's do unselect all. And then let's do the ones that are like residential vehicles. Although this whole thing models like commercial, industrial, pretty much everything. So let's do that. So this is the 2025 basically consumer vehicles, and I'm going to select all of the level 2 charging max rate. Get an average of that. The average is 11.8, so I guess that average was pretty close. I'm going to make that one 1.8 as my recommendation. So this is just saying, typical max EV charging rate on peak. The other thing to consider here is maybe you've sent the ratepayer price signals via lower rates at certain times of the day to send those price signals to encourage charging off peak. You may want to make this a lower number, right? Like if on average, if you've got 10 homes on one transformer, they all average 12 kVA. And let's say you implement that program and you notice that, 5 of those or 6 of those 12 people, if we say 10 homes, let's say 5 of them are actually charging on peak now because you've successfully sent them price signals to shift their behavior. You may want to make that 6 and say on average it's 6 across those 10 homes. So that's another thing to consider. I think that pretty well explains that. The other thing here is this EV coincidence factor that I've put in. So you could account for those, 5 of 10 people or whatever through the kVA amount. You could also account for it here. So this is saying, I'm just going to read the definition because it's a little confusing, but it's the percentage of EVs that are charging concurrently during peak times on the same transformer. For example, if you have 4 EVs on one transfer and would expect for half of them to be charging concurrently, the EV coincidence would be 50%. So it's probably more appropriate to model that, if you implement a charging program or time of use program, it's probably more successful to implement it here. So let's say, 10% of them, let's do an Alt WN. Let's say, so we'll start out at 50% coincidence. I believe on this simulation right now, there's not a lot of EVs at these low EV adoption rate numbers, so we're not going to see like a huge change in terms of failures, but let's make this 5%. Let's say you've done an extraordinary job on your time of use rates and your customers are all bought in. Let's do 5%. Way less failures, right? That's exactly what I would expect. The tool is working perfectly. So that's good. That's basically what EV coincidence is all about. If there's some other factor that you want to shade your, concurrent charging with, you can put it in there. If there's some other reason, like, I guess I can't think of what it would be, but it's basically a very powerful number to shade your concurrent charging for multiple homes on one transformer. So we've thrown that in there. You could do a more complex version of this. We went down that road a little bit for modeling different EV coincidences, and I think there are other tools that are designed for that and do it better. And I don't think you get a lot of value out of a more complex methodology there. So we took the pragmatic approach, and that's what we decided. Moving on, I do want to get into this transformer replacement section. So this is an interesting one. So basically, let's go to the input here. Let's find a year where we had some failures. The second year we had one failure. It's right here. Looks like it was an age-related failure. So this must have been a very old transformer. Let's see how old it was. Yeah, in the 80s. Pretty old. So the second year we have this failure. I'm going to just make this highlighted here so that we can focus in on that. Basically, when this thing is failing, this transformer is failing. We've got the transformer size as 50, and then the next year we've got it as putting in an 80 kVA transformer. Interesting concept. Why would we do that? Well, the way we're getting this 80 number here is all through the variables that you specify. And what we're saying is, in 30 years, it's what's happening here to get this size is it's indexing this entire table, and through this formula up here, it's way too complicated, but it's looking 30 years ahead and seeing what we're modeling in 30 years as this base peak, or this, base load for this transformer and the customers that are on it. So it's looking ahead 30 years, grabbing whatever that modeled number is for load, and then it's multiplying that number by this next variable, the oversized percent for look ahead. And so if I were to look this up, to get from 50 kVA here to 80 kVA there, if I were to look 30 years ahead, it's basically saying, that the load, let's just calculate it out. The load would be 80 divided by 1.1. The load is like 72.7 kVA, and then it's applying that oversized percent, and that's how it's getting your new transformer size. And so, that is just done to help model random chances where you're going to have successive failure from 1 year and then get like an infant mortality failure in a year or two. That is a possibility, and we want to model that. So that's kind of what that's all about. When it comes to sizing these, you're not going to get this size in the summary tab. The one thing you're going to get is the size of the transformer that failed. And so if you wanted to see what size we're recommending, you could get into the inputs and see, but we think it's important for you to make that decision. Like, to go from 50 to 80 kVA, that's a pretty big step. Maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you don't really believe that load is going to increase year over year in that fashion. Maybe you don't believe that EVs are going to become that commonly adopted. So you can make that decision yourself. If you think that the step from 50 to 80 is insane, that's like way too much, just make your demand escalation less here. And if you do that, you're going to see it went from 80 to 71.1. Obviously, nobody makes 71.1 kVA transformer. That's another part of it. You want to step into the interval that makes the most sense. But it's a handy tool to be able to say, we're modeling this 80 years or whatever it is, and we're giving you the information that's backstopped with the technical modeling, and you can make your own decision. We're not prescribing that you need to do it one way or another. And so that's what that's all about. Hopefully it's empowering the utility managers to make decisions based on sound calculations and data. There are these additional 7 more variables down here, but as I mentioned at the top of the video, I cover those variables in a separate video. That one should be called Shaping the Failure Curve. Those variables all have to do with shaping your probability of failure, taking into account the annual failure and then the cumulative failure as you step through year over year. But yeah, that's a basic explanation of these. I should probably also point out that you can goal seek all of these, and you're very welcome to do that. Again, I have to say, make sure you're not torturing the data to get it to say whatever you want. But yeah, that's pretty much it on that. I hope this has been a useful video, and as always, good luck using the tool.